I realized something, Dan.
Oh,
When you know how our names are written right underneath our glorious faces.
yep.
You write out your full name, but I haven't. I realized this is my chance to do the Madonna thing. Like one name. I am Ashe.
Just one
That's
name.
it. Just nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I was wondering about was, did you really feel this week like the whole world was focused on you? Because we had Ash Wednesday.
I had a couple of friends comment, and it made me happy. Actually, I posted earlier this week, just because I'm talking about random stuff right now, about how I don't think Western Christians generally know how to do Lent very well because of our.
Yes.
If you do self-denial from a place without really having a deep and abiding sense of communal and self-fulfillment, you're kind of doing it wrong. But Ash Wednesday was already one of my favorite days. Not the way I see people. Like, I don't like a lot about it, but the idea behind it and what it signifies. But now it's my day. It's mine.
It is. It's your day. So, good morning, Ellen and Michelle and Ceres. One other thing about Ash Wednesday, which I saw that this is apparently now this new thing to mix glitter in with ash, which I just have to say I'm 100% against this concept.
For Ash Wednesday?
Yeah, because glitter is the herpes of craft material, and I just have this image of then the glitter being everywhere and everything.
No, it gets into all the nooks and crannies. Although,
oh my god,
when I had my ceremony, my naming ceremony, I had glittery ash, but then
yeah,
it was outside and it was biodegradable. So
yeah.
There's something about the glitter ash that kind of irks me. You'd think I'd be for it. I'm actually wearing glitter in my eyebrows right now, but it's like the lotiony stuff doesn't get everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
hates fucking glitter. I think we might. Yeah. This might. Maybe we can get anger about this the way we get about the latte situation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we can get outraged about. I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings about glitter in general. I mean, as a general thing, like it's sort of, I don't know. Okay, but yeah. So turning everything into glitter is it's just not my thing. Anyway, do we have a topic today?
Yeah, we're
okay.
continuing.
So we're talking about attention. Apparently, if you put human remains in a microscope, what you see looks like galaxies already.
We are glitter.
Okay.
We are glitter. Be the glitter you want to see in the world.
Be the glitter you want to be.
Yeah, we're continuing our conversation from last week about attention.
And we're demonstrating how hard it is to pay attention right now.
Well, that's
we're manifesting that. Yeah. Glitter is pretty, but hard to clean. Exactly. You cannot clean glitter. I mean, glitter is forever. It's like kind of like love or whatever that thing was.
Diamonds are for.
Yeah, maybe diamonds are forever. Or, I don't know.
You
can't clean. You can't clean glitter. It's just impossible. All right. So attention. We have this issue that we're dealing with in terms of attention, and who calls glitter tiny trash. I like that.
Tiny trash.
Yeah. And I want to, and some of what we talked about last week was, the media manipulating our attention. So everybody's, really focused on the war in Ukraine. For example, nobody pays any attention to the poor brown Muslims being killed in Yemen, that sort of thing. And I want to give another really interesting example of this as I've been watching this unfold. So there's there's a tension within, there's a tension dynamics within each one of these issues. So, you may have been seeing that part of the Ukraine war reporting, which we might call propaganda, is about how China is, being terrible about this, right? And China is, taking Russia's side, and China is not denouncing the invasion, and China is abstaining on all these UN votes, and, China bad, China bad, China bad, China bad, right? Well, I bet you have not thought about, because it has not been in the news at all, what has India been doing in relation to all this? Right. So here's India, second most populous country in the world, also over 1 billion people. But India is, a democracy, and India is also our ally. Well, interestingly enough, India has also been abstaining on all of this and has been refusing to denounce what Russia is doing as well. They're behaving exactly the same way that China is behaving. And this is because India has many, many very strong economic ties with Russia. They very much kind of do this balancing act between being an ally of America and being an ally of Russia. For a long time, many of the really big development projects in India were paid for by Russia. And India has used their relationship with Russia to balance out their relationship with China, which is often very fraught. And so India has just been laying low and not saying or doing anything, right? And Dorinda, Israel, and of course Saudi Arabia. Yeah, exactly. So, and has there been, every day this drumbeat of, India sucks in the news? No, not at all. Haven't seen one thing about this. Because, again, India is our ally, and we don't want to make them look bad. And so these things are very conscious choices that are being made at these very high levels of these massive corporations. And our attention is simply drawn and played from one place to another as the powers that be need and want.
And just to kind of like pivot to more of a local context, just to kind of flesh this out a bit. This idea of attention in propaganda, like when you start talking about this stuff, people can sometimes glaze over and act as though this is conspiratorial, which it kind of is, but it's not. It's not like a bunch of people get in a room and decide everything. Sometimes it just goes on autopilot because of how structures are built. A good example locally is, why is it that media covers the police in a pro-police way? It's not because the editorial board necessarily makes the decision consciously, although there's a lot of that too. But we have to stop and think about it. So you get press. The press is not investigative as much as it used to be. And so what they get public statements, press releases, those sorts of things. And you're more likely to receive those from legitimate sources. So WCCO is a great example of a local news channel where they seem to be very pro-cop. And so you're not going to take press releases from random people or from George Floyd's family, maybe at this point, but you will from the police. And so then all of a sudden there's this bias towards. And so then what they're putting out is being put out in our society. We think of it as neutral. They're just presenting facts, but all the facts skew in one direction, even if the reporting itself is neutral in its value statements. And so that shapes our imaginations. And then we start reacting to what we're seeing. Okay. And it's all framed for us. And so we're locked in. So one of my favorite quotes, I love to quote this all the time. I have it displayed in my house, from Simone Weil, that says, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." That's not a nicety. Who we give our attention to shapes us and also allows us to act in the world. It's really the the precondition over us being in the world and showing up in different ways is how we give our attention. And so if we can't find a way to give our attention to the things that we want to sow in the world.
Well, and it shapes us, and it literally shapes the world. I mean, that's the other thing, is that our attention, what we're paying attention to, shapes our inner life, right? And our emotional responses and the whole, social media outrage and that sort of thing. But then our attention shapes the world, right? So the world is not some, we have this idea that the outside of us is some sort of objective, neutral palette that just exists, right? And everybody has the same thing out there. But that's not true at all. And so the world gets shaped by what many people and communities are giving attention to. China isn't objectively any worse than India. There's not an objective world in which that is somehow the case, right? But the world, from the American perspective, is now being shaped and formed that way because of what we are told to give our attention to, and to what we are sort of being forced to give our attention to because of what's available to us.
And this is, when you start talking about different nations, people start like reacting to ideological lenses. So like, well, China's communist bad, dictatorial, United States, freedom, democracy, good, that sort of thing. And this is kind of part of the, like, anyone who's read Noam Chomsky, I mean, this is kind of what he talks about all the time, is if you give people the sense that they have choices by creating like this sort of manufactured consent, as James brought up last time, the idea that you do actually have choices, but they're limited. And any sort of like authoritarianism in the United States seems like soft authoritarianism because we feel so free. We're free to vote between one of two choices. For president, freedom. We get to vote. And we can write anybody's name in if we want. Doesn't matter that things are locked in such a way that it's almost impossible for us to do something different. So functionally speaking, whether it's dictatorial or not, I'm not saying I'm a fan of dictators. If you're bounded up in only being able to make some choices, even if no one's holding a gun to your head, if you can only do certain choices anyways and can't change much, what difference does it make in terms of agency that we're not a dictatorship? And that, apply that logic to every set of choices we have. Like, so spirituality, we'd like to celebrate creativity in the church in name, but the fact is there's lots of ways of being and doing that are not allowable within church systems. And then we gather together and talk about we celebrate days like Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit comes down like fire and wind and dances on people's heads and everything changes. And we talk about like how we pray for the Holy Spirit to come and change and make things better. But we're not aware of how we bake things in. We're always like, so the question then becomes like, if contemplation isn't about, and spiritual life isn't about just coping, and it's not just about kind of getting in touch with, our quietest thoughts, but also it could be about some of those things, but also it's about us being able to see the world, perceive, and give our attention in ways that are offensive, that are transgressive, that actually create the possibility for real change, not just because we're imagining how things could be different in some sort of sci-fi sense, but because we know that our way of perceiving the world has been locked in. And so therefore our choices have been, this gets very powerful and political real quick when we start thinking about discernment and attention like this, which is why it drives me bonkers. That, I feel like I have to repeat myself all the time because this is so not typical of how people want to think about stuff.
All right, we got some comments coming in.
Michelle writes, the cherry picking of mainstream news sources is disgusting. Well, I mean, it's totally disgusting, and it makes sense that this is where it goes. Like, if you have there's not enough money in it. It's simultaneously, the internet has democratized news, but then also made it narrower because of how capitalism functions. So it's just going to go this way as long as we have these sorts of incentivized ways of responding to the news that stir up agitation without actually giving people the information they could have.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is that this isn't anything new. I mean, it's disgusting in the sense that all acts of will to power are disgusting, right? I mean, if you think back in the medieval times, right? So you didn't have newspapers, but you might have the town crier, which, came to town and gave the edict of the king. And of course, that was coming from just one very particular point of view. You didn't get the edict of the peasants, right? You heard what the king wanted you to hear. And
edict of the peasants usually has pitchforks and guillotines.
Right. And and so this is what those that wish to maintain power do, is that they figure out how to convey information to manufacture a reality that keeps them in power.
Mm-hmm.
And until we understand that, and until we understand that everyone is doing that, we're sort of doomed. I mean, and that's why this whole thing, Russia bad, United States good. It's like, if you immediately start there, everything that follows from that is so highly distorted and manipulated that your vision is already just shot to shit. You have to understand that every single power structure does this. The ones you think are good and the ones you think are bad. They're both doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. And as Ellen pointed out last time, this isn't like a hashtag all lives matter. So yes, Russia is acting like shit. This isn't like we need to have empathy in our hearts towards the Russian government. That's not the talk. We're not even going to equivocate all these different forms of aggression and oppression as all just the same. Like, well, fuck, yeah. It's all very complex, different consequences. But the mechanisms, the levers are tried and true. And so we have to think about, how do we relate to power differently? How do we develop relationships differently? And how do we act in the world in ways that are liberatory, that we're not treated like pawns. We don't fall into being pawns, having our outrage lever pulled, giving our attention to when the powers say, look, and then acting in ways that feed the principalities and powers. Like, that's some hard shit. I mean, Dan and I have spent most of our lives now at this point trying to lean into that. And it's not saying it's somehow easy, but if we don't go there, if we don't create practices and habits ourselves and with others and communities that really dive deeper into truth and give our attention to the real sources of wisdom in the world, then we're kind of fucked. Series writes, media, both liberal and conservative, serve to reinforce U.S. and Western hegemony and dualistic views of politics on purpose. For sure. And at a certain level, like, if you're formed in the system, you might be the most awesome, loving person in the world, like when you're hanging out at home with the kids and extended family, whatever. But you're formed in the system and you get into power, you don't question it. So individual intention at a certain point doesn't matter. And so it is on purpose, even if the people in it aren't doing it on purpose, which is the whole principalities and powers idea. Michelle writes, but it is true. The propaganda machine only covers what benefits Western imperialist capitalism. For some reason, I wanted to say that with the Russian accent, but I didn't. Western imperialist capitalism. Russia, Series writes, Russia deserves the condemnation, yet that righteous condemnation is being weaponized to side with Western hegemony, aka our real-world imperial galactic federation, Nice. Rather than really urging to condemn all empires. Yeah. That's the thing, because we think of ourselves, just to nerd it up even more, we think we're Starfleet. We don't realize that we're the Galactic. You know?
Yeah, we don't realize we're the Cylons.
Yeah, now there's 3
sci-fi metaphors.
I want to go towards Babylon 5, but no one ever sees it. That's my litmus test if someone's a real nerd or not. Sage writes, using the Star Wars analogy. Yes, indeed. Ellen writes, regarding freedom, besides national authoritarianism, in most current workplace settings, people live under tiny dictatorships anyway. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you know, this is why these conceptual frames get so complicated, right? Freedom, dictatorship, democracy, socialism, capitalism. You know, at a certain point, we really have no idea what we're talking about. And we're just throwing around these concepts either to make ourselves feel better or to hammer home our point. Right. I mean, if your life, you know, and this gets to Ash, what you were saying earlier about the issue of choices, right? I mean, if you grow up in a setting where your only job options are barely living wage jobs in, you know, factories that are these horrible kinds of workplaces. You know, I think a lot about, we drove through Pelican Rapids, Minnesota the other day. And, you know, there's a turkey plant.
You can't say that. You can't say Pelican Rapids without my brain automatically going to that jingle. The Pelican Rapids sure can make you feel at home. If you grew up in that part of Minnesota, every time there's a basketball tournament on television, they have the Pelican Rapids commercial. I don't know if they still do. Sorry, I had to. I just had to do that.
No, that's good. And, you know, and there's this turkey plant that intentionally employs a lot of undocumented labor, and the working conditions in there are abysmal. And because people are undocumented, they can't say anything because, you know, then they just get threatened with deportation. I mean, that's a complete dictatorship. There is no democracy there. There is no freedom there. There are just people that have very, very limited choices in the world that are simply doing what the best they can to survive. And so to, you know, subsume that within, oh, we're this wonderful free democracy, and to not actually, and again, this is the attention piece. So what are we giving our attention to when we have a conceptual frame like that? Are we simply using that conceptual frame to not pay attention? Right? We think we're paying attention. Oh, you know, this is what America is like. No, we're using that to obscure many of the realities that are going on. And so, you know, this contemplative practice of continually allowing our attention to deepen and broaden, to allow ourselves to interrogate more and more what is this world that is out there, is so vitally important.
Right. Kevin writes, self-interest plays a huge part in what countries, corporations, institutions, and individuals pay attention to, and whoever dominates the narrative can certainly influence self-interest. It's hard to break the pattern. Yeah, and, you know, we've said this, and it is hard. Like what Dan was just talking about, like this contempt. We are not evolved to be universal minds that can perceive all things and then act with vast computational power. Like, of course, I can barely pay attention to my own thoughts a lot of the time. It's hard. So like the idea that somehow I can perceive reality clearly and perfectly and then act in ways that are meaningful, it's very difficult. And this is the importance of community, of intentionally choosing who you're with. It's one of the reasons why, and I'm going to try to avoid going down a diatribe with this, I get irked as hell with people who really believe that the church is the body of Christ in the world and they want to change things. And so they put their eggs in that basket, and they'll be critical of institutional church, like there'll be like overly institutional forms of church, and they'll talk about this pure idea of church. And then the rest of the time, they're banking like everyone else. They're doing all the other institutions the same.
Right.
So the point is, all of these institutions shape us. These are all aspects of what it means to live communally. And we have to, there's no like going somewhere once a week and transforming things. Community has to be much more powerful and much more and slower. And we have to be able to marinate with one another to kind of, which could be a great way of inviting someone to a hot tub. I just realized. This is so I'm gonna
all right, I want to get to
Sirius is kind of going in that direction. We need to focus on transforming cultural norms, and building social formations that encourage people to be both actual trailblazers and community builders at once. That's very hard, and there's not encouragement to do this. Like
no, and just to give a very concrete example, so I'm teaching this class on Celtic Christianity now, and we've got one fellow in the class. He's been in a number of my courses, and he's a man in his 80s. He's a man in his 80s, and he's a big church guy, a big church goer. And since he started taking these classes, and he said this in several of the classes, and he said it again the other day, he said, I've been going to church all my life. He said, and what happens? You go to church, you come in, you sing some songs, you sit there, you say a few words, you hear a sermon or a homily, you get a benediction, you go in the narthex, you talk about the weather, and you leave. He said, until I've been in these classes, I have never had an opportunity to really talk deeply about these spiritual topics in my spiritual formation. Right? And this is a guy that's been going to church like probably close to 52 Sundays a year for 80 years, right? 4,000 Sundays. And he says, I've never had a chance to really delve deeply into my spiritual life. Right. So that's an example of how these institutions create this sort of zombification of humanity, and how they are really not doing the kinds of things that we're talking about that need to happen for human beings to evolve. I mean, human beings, we just keep doing the same shit over and over and over again. Pull out the weapons, get pissed off, kill a bunch of people, destroy a bunch of things. We have not evolved at all, pretty much, for the last 40,000 years, and so to have a very radical and liberatory view on how we need to engage and conduct ourselves in the world, this is a 4-alarm fire. Like, we should have some real energy and kind of desperation around this.
A couple comments here.
We're almost out of time.
From Zeleny. Sure, but nuance and Millerism are important. Russia is an authoritarian far-right regime with largely far-right population. I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily say that most people are far-right in that country, but yes, far-right regime. Ukraine is a libs country with very liberal regime. Also, NATO operations, which are few, look at the list on Wikipedia, are mostly okay, or relatively okay. Yes, ideally there should be no war interventions, etc., but practically, I mean, we're not saying like you shouldn't pick a side in who you feel like is the aggressor and who's the aggressed, or want a specific sorts of outcomes. I mean, I think the NATO comment is maybe a little naive, because it doesn't have to be official NATO activities for NATO to have power as a symbolic reference point, as basically an extension, gloves of the United States into the world affairs. But yes, so it's not that we're saying we should be objective third-party observers if everything's happened and not have desired outcomes, or not wish that Russia would stop it, or not long for Putin's demise. I'm all for those sorts of things, but I also like, if we're not trying to take away nuance, we're trying to add by saying, like, there are causes and effects and consequences to this that are more than just stopping Russia from invading Ukraine.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just push back on this some because I'm sorry, I'm not buying this at all, and the reason that I'm not buying it, and I'm gonna keep bringing this up, I have not seen one Yemeni flag on my Facebook page in the last 4 years, right? Suddenly, everybody's got a Ukrainian flag on their little Facebook profile. We have been fighting a proxy war. Yeah, we have been fighting a proxy war in Yemen for the last 7 years. At this point, there's, depending on which source you read, there's a minimum of 100,000, maybe up to almost 500,000 people dead. You've got millions of people internally displaced. You've got potentially 2 million people are going to starve there by 2030. This has all been paid for by American taxpayers, and we're using Saudi Arabia as our proxy in the region to fight this war. And to say, oh, we're a liberal country and NATO operations don't do anything bad, I'm sorry, that is just complete bullshit. It is complete bullshit. And the fact that we buy into that so easily, because we look at, and if you read, there was a great article in Al Jazeera a little while ago, a couple of days ago, I posted it, that was going through and highlighting Twitter feeds from mostly UK press, where all these fucking racist British journalists were going like, oh my God, we're seeing blonde people getting bombed, civilized people getting bombed. This is so terrible, basically saying, well, it's okay to bomb, brown-haired people. It's okay to bomb, quote, uncivilized people. Another part of what the fuck is that? I mean, really?
There's a lot.
And I just feel like we need to give this up. We need to give this up. This is just pure propaganda that we have been formed in, and we need to give this up. And it's the same thing with what we just went through with Black History Month, where we focus on one or two things. And, our friend Gregory pointed this out to me. Everybody makes a big deal about Emmett Till and how this was like some unique, terrible thing. When they dredged the river for Emmett Till's body, right, they found 7 other Black boys' bodies in that part of the river, which, now again, you've never heard about that. Why did they go to that part of the river? Because all the white people in that area knew this is the place where when we kill a Black kid, we chuck him in the river. Okay, so this is not some weird aberration, right? This is not a weird aberration. This is the norm. This is what white people do to Black people in America. This was the normal cultural thing. And so again, for us to say, oh, we're this nice liberal democracy, we don't do these bad things like Russia does, that is factually incorrect. That is factually incorrect.
Yeah.
So I got all excited.
Yeah. When one of us gets pissed off, it's a thing to behold. I mean, this is
a thing of beauty.
It's a thing of beauty. And we could go more deeply on this just to get some of these comments out here.
Yeah.
David writes,
over time.
Zombification of humanity that gets past the spiritual formation. Yes. Michelle, yes to Dan's Yemen comment. Fuck NATO. I was ranting about this today too, Dan. I hear ya. Sirius is like loving the pushback too. And then Ellen's writing, I love to see Dan going up passionately after time. Yeah, right. This is where,
yeah, after 30 minutes. So
yeah, there's so much more we could say about this. And it's, again, why are we paying attention to what we pay attention to is of utmost concern. And there's even like little things like the idea that I see so many people posting pictures of how handsome the president of Ukraine is. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe, but like there's layers to it. And I don't want to shame individuals. Like, to me, this is the thing that's always hard for people to get. When I see a pattern and name it, because we're conditioned in our society to think that every action and everything is kind of comes from individual intention. So we hear that as an individualistic moralizing statement. So me noticing how there's this, for some reason, people are sharing about how hot so-and-so is, that's propaganda. Like, that's kind of coded with whiteness, right? Because we don't, there's not pictures of hot Yemenis, right?
No.
Now, does it mean if an individual shares that I think they're stupid? No, that's not the point of that. I'm trying to call attention to a pattern, and we all fall into these habits because of the systems we're in, and so we need to break the habits. Ceres, get the last word because we're way past time.
The last word.
Dan's rant. Ceres writes, plus a lot of the capitalists in Russia that took advantage of the fall of the USSR were Harvard graduates. They have oligarchs. We have billionaires. By the way, that's another one.
Right. What's the difference between an oligarch and a billionaire job creator? Right.
Ellen writes, during the episode, 5-year-old challenged me, change your thoughts. Try to don't think about yourself. Oh, and then here comes Catherine.
Oh, Catherine. Yes. Way past time.
Okay. This will be it. This is it. And then we're going to end.
This is it.
Catherine writes, to build on the themes of attention in the zombification comment, I wonder we can sum it up as what's in your head. Wink.
Wink. What's in your head?
Oh, I lied here.
All right. And Julia just woke up.
Good morning and goodbye. I'll watch the vid with coffee. Yeah.
All right. This has been great. Thanks a lot, everybody. Good to see everyone.
Dan's going to go take a nap now. See you next time, everyone.
Bye.